Wyoming Territory, late spring of 1882. Just outside of Laramie, the day the wind carried dust like ash and the prairie held its breath. Delia Booker stood in the middle of the road, a rifle in her hands and two children behind her, watching as the stagecoach rattled away in the distance. Her dress was torn at the hem, her boots too small, her heart too full of things she could not afford to feel right now. "They left," whispered Keaton, the younger of the two, his voice barely louder than the wind. Delia's grip tightened around the rifle. "I know." The children had been left in her care 4 days ago. Their mother, her older sister, had cried as she begged Delia to take them, her hands trembling, her bruises fresh. She had promised she would return, but she never stepped off that coach. Now Delia stood alone with Keaton and his sister, Cora, in front of the rundown ranch house her father had built 20 years before. The land was dry, the well temperamental, and the roof leaked when it rained. It was not much, but it was all she had. She crouched to their level. "You two are staying, that is settled." Cora, all of 10 years old and already taller than her brother, narrowed her eyes. "What if she comes back?" Delia didn't answer. She just reached up and brushed dust from the girl's cheek before drawing them both into the safety of her arms. "Then she knows where to find you." That night, Delia sat on the porch long after the wind had gone still, the rifle across her lap and her eyes on the horizon. The prairie stretched wide and lonely in every direction. She had not planned to raise children. She had not planned on staying here either. But plans did not matter much out here. Out here, you did what needed doing. And then, as the sun dipped behind the hills and turned the sky the color of blood, a lone rider appeared, dust trailed behind the horse like smoke. The man sat tall in the saddle, his coat flapping, his hat pulled low as he approached. Delia stood, rifle still in hand. "You lost," she called out when he was close enough to hear. "Not exactly," he called back, voice steady. "I was told this ranch belonged to the Booker family." Delia did not lower the rifle. "That depends who's asking." He dismounted in one smooth motion and stepped forward. He was tall, lean, with a sharp jaw and eyes the color of river stones. His voice was calm but not soft. "My name's Zeke Hartley. Your brother Jacob owed me money, a lot of it. He said if he could not pay, I should come here and talk to his sister." Delia's mouth tightened. Jacob had not been seen in 6 months, and now his debts were walking up her porch steps. She leveled the rifle. "You planning to collect with bullets or words?" Zeke raised his hands, palms open. "I did not come to make trouble. I came because I need land. I have cattle, a few hands, and nowhere to run them. Jacob said this place was half mine if he could not pay." Delia stared at him. "My brother had no right to say that." "Maybe not," Zeke said, "but I am here now." They stood there, the wind picking up again, carrying the smell of sagebrush and dust between them. Inside the house, Cora peeked through the window. "Who is he?" she whispered. Keaton shrugged. "He talks funny." Delia finally lowered the rifle. "You want land, Mr. Hartley, you can sleep in the barn, no promises beyond that." Zeke nodded once. "Fair enough." That night he slept in the hayloft and Delia lay awake inside, listening for movement. She heard none. The children slept beside her, curled under a quilt that smelled like cedar and old memories. In the morning, Zeke was already outside, sleeves rolled, digging fence posts. "You do not waste time," Delia said, stepping out onto the porch with a cup of coffee in hand. "I do not have any to waste." She watched him work. His movements were clean, practiced. He did not ask for help, but he did not seem like the kind of man who needed to. "You said you had cattle back in Rawlins. Keeping them fed is costing me more each day." Delia looked out over the dry, wide land. "This ranch barely has enough grass for a rabbit." "Then I will help fix it." She raised an eyebrow. "Why?" He paused, leaned on the shovel. "Because I do not want to take your home. I want to make something with it." Delia wanted to believe him. But belief was a hard thing to come by. By the end of the week, Zeke had repaired the barn door, cleared the west field, and earned a quiet nod from Cora. Keaton followed him around like a shadow, asking endless questions about horses and rope and how to build a fire without matches. Delia watched all of it from a distance. She had not trusted a man in years, not after her father died, not after Jacob left. Not after the children's real father hit her sister so hard she could barely stand, but Zeke was steady. He never raised his voice, he never asked questions, he just did the work. One night after the children had gone to bed, Delia stepped outside and found him sitting on the porch, sharpening a knife. "You could have gone somewhere else," she said. "Why here?" He looked up at her, slow and sure. "Because I remember you," she froze. "What?" Laramie Fair. 12 years ago. You poured lemonade into my lap when I said your horse was ugly." Delia blinked. "That was you. I never forgot you." She sat down beside him, heart beating faster than she liked. "That was a long time ago, still true." They sat in silence after that. The kind that said more than words ever could. The next day, Zeke rode to Rawlins and came back with 4 cattle and a promise that more would follow. Delia helped him mark the new grazing lines. Cora collected eggs from the hens. Keaton tried to rope a fence post and fell flat on his back, laughing. And that night, as the stars came out one by one, Zeke stood beside Delia by the porch rail. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked. "All the time," she said. "What keeps you here?" She looked back toward the house where 2 children were asleep under her roof, then at him. "Maybe I was waiting for the right reason to stay." He took her hand. "It was rough from work, warm from the firelight. Then let me be that reason." Delia did not answer. But she did not pull her hand away either, and that was enough for now. The rains came late that year, but when they came hard. Thunder rolled in from the west like hooves pounding the earth, and the sky turned the color of old iron. Delia stood in the doorway of the barn, her skirt soaked to the knees, hair plastered to her neck, watching as Zeke led the last of the cattle to shelter. Lightning broke open the sky, and for a moment everything was laid bare: the jagged hills, the half-mended fence. The worry etched deep into Zeke's brow as he turned to her, rain running down his face. "Get inside," he said, voice low and steady beneath the storm. She didn't move. "The North Trough's overflowing. If it breaks, we'll lose the slope." "I'll see to it. I'll go with you." He didn't argue. They moved together through the mud, boots sinking with every step. The trough had already begun to slip its side, water rushing downhill in a shallow, cutting stream. Zeke dropped to his knees, braced with his shoulder, and Delia took the shovel to pack earth along the edge. They worked without speaking, breathing hard, soaked through. The wind howled and the rain stung, but the trough held. When they made it back inside the barn, the storm still raging, Zeke took a waterlogged blanket from the loft and draped it over her shoulders. "You don't stop, do you?" he asked, voice low. Delia's teeth chattered, but she met his gaze. "Can't afford to." He looked at her like he was seeing something he hadn't quite understood until now. Then he turned and started stoking the firebox they'd fitted into the back wall last week, coaxing a flame to life. Once the fire caught and the warmth spread, she peeled off her gloves and sat down on a hay bale, boots dripping beside her. Zeke stood a few feet away, his shirt clinging to him, arms folded. "I saw you break that filly last Tuesday, quiet as a whisper. Didn't even raise your voice." Delia glanced up. She only needed to believe she wasn't going to be hurt. He nodded once, slowly. "Most men would have used rope and noise. You didn't." "She wouldn't have trusted me after that." Zeke dropped his gaze to the floorboards. "I thought you were like glass when I got here, breakable, easy to shatter." Delia tilted her head, curious. "And now?" "I think you're the one thing out here that doesn't give way." The fire crackled between them. Outside, the storm softened to a steady rhythm against the roof. Delia pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I used to think if I did everything right, I'd be safe," she said. "Keep my head down, say yes when I was supposed to. Didn't work." Zeke crouched by the fire, feeding another stick into the flames. "Did someone make you believe that?" She hesitated, then looked away. "My mother. She thought quiet made for safe living. I tried it her way for a while. And now, I don't believe in safe anymore. I believe in knowing what you're worth and not letting anyone take it from you." Zeke's eyes met hers. "That's a different kind of strength." Delia stood, set the blanket aside. It's the only kind left. They didn't speak again until morning. The storm had passed, leaving puddles the size of bathtubs in the yard. The cattle were restless but unharmed. Cora and Keaton helped empty the water barrels and sweep the porch dry, their arms and backs learning the rhythm of the work without complaint. Delia saddled her mare and rode out to the far ridge where the land dipped low into a half-forgotten gully. She needed to see if the runoff had carved through the fence line. Zeke caught up to her just as she was dismounting. He didn't ask where she was going or why, just fell in beside her as they walked the ridge. The fence was mostly intact, but the soil was soft, the posts leaning. Delia crouched beside one, fingers pressing into the earth. "We'll need to brace these," she said. Zeke nodded. "I can haul the posts tomorrow." She looked up at him. I'll help, I know." They stood there a while side by side, watching the wind ripple through the soaked grass. A hawk circled above, wings wide and silent. "I've been in debt since I was 16, Zeke said after a long silence. "My brother left me with a busted herd and a barn full of rot. I thought if I could just get out from under it, I'd be free." Delia didn't look at him. "And now, I'm not sure I want to be free, not like that." She straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. "What do you want then?" He glanced over at her, his jaw tight. "Something that holds, something real." Their eyes caught, and Delia felt something settle low in her chest, not a flutter but a weight. A good one. Back at the ranch, Cora had taken to braiding strips of rawhide for reins, her fingers nimble and precise. Keaton was learning to track prints along the creek, marking deer and raccoon with equal fascination. Zeke taught him how to tell a fresh trail from an old one, never raising his voice, always patient. Delia watched him from the window one evening, his arm around Keaton's shoulders as the boy pointed to a trail in the dust. There was no performance in it, just quiet presence. Later, she found Zeke in the shed, repairing a broken stirrup with careful hands. "You're good with them," she said. He didn't look up. "They're good kids." "They're not yours," he paused. Then softly, "No, but they matter to you." Delia leaned against the doorframe. "I didn't ask for them." "But I'll keep them. I know." His fingers moved slow, deliberate. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known." Delia swallowed hard. "I've had to be." He set the stirrup down. "You shouldn't have to do it alone." She stepped closer, her voice quiet. "I won't." "Not if you stay." "I'm not going anywhere." The next morning, he brought her a ring. Not with ceremony, but with certainty. He handed it to her in the barn just after sunrise, when the frost still clung to the grass and the world was quiet. It was silver, plain, shaped by hand, flawed and perfect in its own way. Delia looked down at it, then up at him. "We're not built for easy," she said. "No," he replied, "but we're built for each other." She took the ring, slipping it onto her finger without hesitation. Outside, the sun broke clean over the ridge and the day began. The first foal was born at dawn, legs wobbly and slick with newness, its mother panting in the straw. Delia had been up most of the night, kneeling in the corner of the stall, sleeves rolled to her elbows, eyes steady. Zeke had kept the lantern high, casting light across the mare's flank, his shoulder brushing hers as they worked. When the foal finally slipped free, Delia eased it toward its mother's belly, whispering something he couldn't quite hear. But he could see it, the way her body lost its tension, the way her hands lingered on the newborn's damp neck. It was reverence, not relief. Outside, the grass was beginning to green. Winter had been long, brittle, and lean. The firewood had run low by February, and the hens had stopped laying altogether in March. But the worst of it had passed without breaking them. Now, with April warming the wind, the ranch breathed again. Zeke leaned against the stall door, watching Delia wash her hands in a pail. Her braid had come loose, strands curling damp against her cheek. She didn't glance up. "You've done that before," he said. "I've done most things before," she answered, drying her fingers on her skirts. He pushed off the door, crossing to the mare. "She's strong." Delia looked at the animal, at the foal nuzzling for milk. "She didn't want help at first, thought I was trouble." He ran a hand down the mare's neck, slow and careful. "And now, she knows I don't take more than I give." Zeke watched her for a long moment. You think people can learn that too? Her gaze met his. Some do. The wind pushed through the open barn door, bringing the sharp smell of damp hay and something softer underneath early blossoms from the chokecherry by the creek. They worked the north pasture that afternoon, repairing a break in the distant fencing where snowmelt had softened the posts. Delia loaded the wagon with fresh cedar, her arms sure and practiced. Zeke drove, guiding the team with quiet commands. Cora and Keaton stayed behind to boil water and mend torn flour sacks, their laughter drifting faintly through the valley when the wind shifted. Zeke set the last post into the ground, bracing it with his boot while Delia tamped the earth firm. You ever think it would look like this? He asked, not looking at her. She glanced up. What? Your life, this land? She wiped her brow with the back of her glove, didn't think it would look like anything. Just thought I'd survive it. He nodded once, then stepped back to take in the fence line. I used to think quiet meant I'd failed, like if my name wasn't known in every saloon or stockyard, I'd wasted something. Delia picked up a rusted nail and turned it between her fingers. Maybe being known has nothing to do with being right, he looked over. You ever think about leaving it, the ranch? No, your name, Delia's hand stilled. Booker's the only thing I've got left of my mother. He gave a slow nod. Only reason I ask is. It's not the only name you could have. She didn't speak right away. The only sound was the soft creak of the wagon boards and the rustle of grass. Zeke, she said finally, you already gave me a ring. You don't have to give me your name unless you mean to. He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the sweat on his collar and the cedar from the posts. I meant to the minute I offered it. Delia's eyes didn't leave his. Then I'll take it. But not because I need it. I know. That night they told the children. Cora didn't react at first, just nodded and went back to darning the hem of her dress. Keaton asked if it meant they could have pie at the wedding. Delia laughed, the sound surprising even herself. They married on a Sunday at the edge of the pasture where the wildflowers had begun to bloom. No preacher, just Zeke's hand around hers and a solemn promise spoken under the open sky. Cora stood beside Delia, her chin lifted high, while Keaton clutched a bouquet of prairie phlox he'd picked himself. Afterward, they ate cold chicken and cornbread at the long table Zeke had built from spare barnwood. No one toasted. No one made speeches. But later, as the sun dropped behind the hills and the shadows grew long across the fields, Zeke leaned in close and whispered, "You don't look breakable anymore." Delia didn't smile. She just touched his jaw, running her thumb along the edge of his beard. I never was. The foal grew quickly, legs steady and eyes bright. Cora named her Maple after the tree that had once stood outside their old home. Delia let her take charge of the weaning, teaching her how to gentle the young horse without force. Cora listened more than she spoke, her hands learning the shape of patience. One afternoon in late May, a man rode up the trail from the south dusty coat, hat pulled low, rifle slung across his back. Delia was mending harness straps on the porch while Keaton practiced figures in the dirt with a stick. Zeke stood slowly when he saw the rider, his jaw tightening. Delia rose without a word. She recognized the man before he spoke. Didn't expect to find you here, he said, swinging down from his horse. She didn't answer, just crossed her arms. I came for the boy, he continued, flicking his eyes toward Keaton. He's mine. Zeke stepped between them. You're not putting hands on him, Delia said, voice flat. You don't get to say that. I do now. The man snorted. You married him? He gestured toward Zeke with a sneer. That's rich. Delia didn't flinch. You left them. You don't get to walk back in like you didn't. Keaton had gone still, his stick forgotten in the dirt. The man took a step forward, but Zeke didn't budge. You lay a finger on him, you'll answer to me. The man's gaze shifted, weighing the odds. Then he spat in the dust and turned. You ain't seen the last of me. Zeke's hand hovered near his belt, but Delia grabbed his wrist. Let him ride, she said, and he did. That night, Keaton asked if the man would come back. Delia took him into her lap and ran her fingers through his hair. If he does, she said, He'll find we're not the same people he left behind. Zeke stood by the window, watching the horizon. He didn't speak, but his hand rested on the rifle beside the door. The summer passed in long, golden days. The fields yielded more than expected, and the chickens laid again. Cora helped Zeke build a second coop, her quiet confidence growing with each nail she set. Keaton learned to ride, falling twice but getting up both times without complaint. Delia started training the roan gelding that had been too wild for any of the local hands. Zeke watched from the fence line, arms crossed, saying nothing. She worked slowly, never rushing, always letting the horse come to her. The first time it let her place the saddle without bucking, she stepped back and met Zeke's gaze across the round pen. He tipped his hat just once. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Delia turned to him and said, "You ever wonder what you would have done if you hadn't come here?" He didn't answer right away. The fire popped, sending a spark into the twilight. "I'd still be owing something to someone," he said. "Still running. And now, I'm building." She leaned her head against his shoulder, the warmth of him steady beside her. "You thought I was fragile," she said. "I did." "What changed your mind?" Zeke reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "You didn't ask to be believed. You just showed me." They sat in silence after that, watching the fire burn low. The stars came out one by one, and the ranch settled into stillness. Inside, the children slept beneath the roof they'd made whole. Outside, the horses breathed in the dark, heads lowered, hearts quiet. And between them, in the hush of that Wyoming night, something unspoken held fast, weathered but unbreakable. The soil turned sweet after the spring rains, yielding easier under Delia's boots as she walked the east pasture with a sack of seeds slung over her shoulder. She moved with quiet focus, not quick but not slow either, her steps timed to the rhythm of the land. Zeke had asked if she wanted help, but she'd shaken her head. Some work needed to be done with your own hands, and she'd learned long ago that planting was one of them. It was not about speed, it was about setting things right from the start. By mid-morning, the sun had climbed high enough to draw sweat from her brow. She paused beneath the cottonwood near the fence line, wiping her face on the inside of her sleeve. The trunk had split years ago, a deep fork in the middle where lightning had cracked it open. Still, it held strong. She tilted her head back and looked through the branches to the clear sky. A hawk circled far above, wings stretched wide. It hadn't rained in over a week, and the air held the dry hush of waiting. She could hear the chickens fussing near the coop, and farther off, the steady clink of metal from the shed where Zeke was reshaping plow blades. "Finish the south row," called Cora from behind, breath caught short from the uphill walk. Delia turned as the girl approached, braid pulled tight, hands dusty to the wrists. "Good," Delia said. "You can rest before we start the west slope." Cora dropped beside the cottonwood, stretching out her legs. "You always know what to do." "No," Delia said. "I just know what not to ignore." Cora leaned back on her hands. "Zeke says you can read the land like a book." Delia gave a soft snort. "Then he hasn't read many books. He said you saved the last calf last week, said you knew it was coming a full day early." Delia picked up a small stone and rolled it between her calloused fingers. "Animals speak, not with words, but they speak. You just have to be quiet enough to listen." Cora's mouth twisted. "I'm not good at quiet." "You're good at steady," Delia said. "That matters more." The girl's face colored faintly. "You think so? I know so." They sat a while longer in the shade, the wind tugging gently at the grass. Then Delia stood, brushing her palms on her skirts. "Let's check the creek before we head in. If it's dropped too low, we'll need to pull from the well." Cora followed without question. Down near the waterline, the earth had cracked in places, pale and dry. Delia crouched and ran her fingers through the silt. The surface was brittle, but the deeper soil still held moisture. They could go another 2 days, maybe 3, before pulling barrels. As they turned back, Delia caught sight of Zeke riding out from the barn, leading the roan gelding by a long line. The horse tossed its head, resisting but not fighting. Zeke spoke low and even, barely louder than the wind. Delia slowed her pace. "He's trying to get that one to carry a pack," Cora said. "Too soon," Delia murmured. "You want me to tell him?" "No, let's see what he does." Zeke brought the gelding to a stop near the hitch rail, looped the lead around the post, and stepped back. He didn't touch the saddle bags, just stood with his arms folded, watching the horse shift and snort. Delia waited until he'd stepped away entirely before she approached. "He won't take the weight yet," she said. Zeke nodded. "I figured, but I wanted to see how he'd react to the idea. Still too tight in the shoulders. He's bracing." "I noticed that." Delia rubbed the horse's neck, feeling the tension under her palm. "He'll need another few weeks. He's smart, but he's slow to trust." Zeke didn't answer right away. "Then, you think that's something you can teach, trust?" Delia looked at him. "No, but you can give it a place to land." That night, after the chores were done and the children had gone to bed, Delia sat on the porch with her knitting, a shawl slowly growing between her fingers. Zeke came out with a tin cup and sat beside her. "I sent a letter to a man in Cheyenne," he said. "He's selling seed wheat, claims it roots fast and holds through dry years." Delia didn't look up. "What kind of yield?" 4 to 6 bushels per acre if the ground holds. She marked her place and set the needles aside. "We don't have enough cleared land for more than a few rows. I can grade more in the east lot." She looked at him then. "You're serious?" "I am." She studied his face. There was something different behind his eyes, not ambition exactly, but a kind of settled hunger. Not for wealth, but for permanence. "You think we'll still be here next spring?" she asked. "I do. You think the land will hold?" "I think we will." She leaned back, letting her head rest against the rail behind her. "It's not easy, Zeke. I'm not easy." "No," she said. "But you're steady." He reached for her hand, not with urgency but with the certainty of something already decided between them. "You don't have to believe in the land, Delia. Just believe in us." She held his hand in hers, thumb tracing the familiar calluses. "I do. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here." In early June, a letter arrived from Laramie. Delia opened it with care, sitting at the kitchen table while the wind stirred the curtains. There were only a few lines, written in a hand she hadn't seen in almost a year. Her sister was alive. Living with a cousin near Fort Bridger. She had worked as a seamstress and asked after the children but made no mention of returning. Delia read the note twice, then folded it and put it in the drawer. When Zeke asked, she told him the truth. "She's not coming back." He didn't offer comfort. He didn't need to. Later that evening, Delia told Cora and Keaton. Cora nodded once and went to the corral. Keaton asked if they could write back. Delia said yes. That night, Cora returned with a bundle of wildflowers and left them on the table without a word. By mid-June, the cattle began to fatten on the new grass, and the hens laid more than the baskets could hold. Zeke built a frame for drying herbs, and Delia taught Cora how to bind sage for storing. The roof patch held through the first summer storm, and the well stayed clear. The roan gelding accepted the pack, and one morning, as dawn broke gold across the hills, Delia stepped into the pasture, whistled once, and the young mare came to her without hesitation. Zeke watched from the porch, arms crossed, face unreadable. "She's different now," he said when Delia returned. "She's seen enough to know what won't hurt her." "You think horses forget?" "No," Delia said, "but they learn what doesn't repeat." Zeke nodded, then looked at her, long and quiet. "You were never fragile." Delia's mouth curved. "You just didn't know where to look." And he did now. He saw it in the way she walked the land like it was hers, not because someone gave it to her, but because she earned every inch. He saw it in the way the children leaned toward her voice. He saw it in the way she stood beside him, not behind. She'd tamed more than horses on that land. She'd carved a future out of the raw earth, and in doing so, she'd given him something he'd never had before, a home. The wheat arrived in the middle of July, packed in burlap sacks marked with faded ink, the corners stitched tight with twine. Zeke unloaded them himself, stacking them neatly in the shed while the heat bore down like iron. Delia stood nearby with a ledger open in her hand, noting the weight of each sack and the date it came in. They didn't speak much. not because there was nothing to say, but because the work itself held something sacred. Later, when the dust settled and the sun dipped low, she'd tell him what she thought about the new fencing plan. But just now, she watched the way his shoulders moved beneath his shirt, the way he set each sack down with care, not wasting strength. The land had begun to soften again, not just from the rain, but from the steadiness of their days. Each task layered itself over the next, mending, planting, tending until the ranch no longer felt like something they were trying to rescue, but something they were building. By the first week of August, Cora had finished sewing curtains for the front room, using muslin traded from town and a pattern she'd drawn herself. She didn't comment when she hung them, just stood back to see how the light filtered through the cloth, then nodded once and moved on to her next task. Keaton had taken to reading aloud in the evenings, his voice halting but determined. Delia sat with her knitting and listened without correcting him. One afternoon, Delia and Zeke rode out to the far edge of the property, where the creek forked around a rise of stone and the cottonwoods grew thick. They dismounted and walked the rest of the way, leading their horses by the reins. She hadn't been out that far since before winter, and now the place looked different, less wild, more familiar. There was a stillness to it, not empty but full, as if the ground itself had settled deeper into its own skin. Zeke stopped near the water, tying his gelding to a low branch. "I've been thinking about putting a line of fence through here. Keep the cattle from wandering past the ridge." Delia crouched by the creek, letting the cool water run over her fingers. "It'd mean cutting through those saplings. I know, you'll lose shade." "I'd rather lose that than chase calves through 3 miles of rock." She smiled without looking up. "Fair." He joined her by the water, sinking into the grass beside her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The creek ran quiet, shallow, and clear, and the wind stirred the leaves overhead in a hush. "You ever miss the sound of people?" he asked finally. Delia let the question settle before answering. "Not the noise, but sometimes I miss the ease of it. Knowing there's someone else close by who knows your story without needing to be told." Zeke picked up a small stone and turned it over in his hand. "I never had that, not really." "You do now." He looked at her then, not surprised, just still. "I know." They didn't ride back until the light began to fade. As they reached the barn, Delia slowed her mare and turned in the saddle to look out across the fields. The wheat hadn't gone in yet, but the soil was ready. The rows were marked, the sacks stacked, the tools clean and waiting. Inside the house, Cora had started a stew, the smell of onion and bay leaf rising through the open windows. Keaton sat at the table with a pencil in his hand and furrowed brows, working out sums on a scrap of paper. Delia brushed a hand over his shoulder as she passed, and he leaned into the touch without looking up. Later, after supper, Zeke stayed behind to sweep the porch while Delia folded laundry near the fire. When she finished, she stepped outside and found him sitting on the steps, the broom resting against the rail. "You always sweep in the same direction," she said. He looked up. "Keeps the dust from catching the wind. You think about things most folks don't. Used to keep me up at night. Now it keeps the porch clean." She sat down beside him, tucking her legs beneath her. The air smelled of ash and dry grass, the sky heavy with stars. "I've been thinking," she said. "That's never a simple sentence with you." "I know." He waited, watching her face. "I want to build a root cellar, south side of the barn. The stone's already loose there and it'll keep through winter." Zeke nodded. "I can dig it." "I know you can, but I want us to do it together." He didn't question why, just reached for her hand and held it, quiet and easy. The next morning they started digging. They worked in the shade of the barn, the soil cool and packed with clay. Cora brought water and watched them mark the depth with a stick. Keaton asked if they'd find bones. Delia said if they did, they'd bury them again with respect. By the third day, the hole was deep enough to stand in, and Zeke began lining the walls with stone. Delia hauled each rock herself, choosing them from the creek for shape and weight. They said little, but the silence between them was full of trust. It took a week to finish. When it was done, they stood inside, sweat on their necks and dirt beneath their nails, looking at what they'd made. "You ever think about how something like this lasts?" Zeke asked. She ran her hand along the stone wall. "I think about it every time I build anything now." In early September, the wheat went in. Cora helped Delia guide the seed into the furrows while Zeke and Keaton followed with the harrow. The work was slow but steady. Each row marked something more than harvest. It marked place and time and the choice to stay. Midway through the season, a letter arrived from Fort Bridger. Short, polite. Their sister had remarried, was relocating east, and would not be returning west. No address given, no farewell. Delia read it once, then passed it to Cora without a word. Cora read it, folded it, and placed it in the fire. "She was never ours," Cora said. "Not really." Delia didn't reply. She didn't need to. That night the wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine from the mountains. Zeke stood on the porch, arms crossed, and listened to it. "We're going to get a hard frost soon," he said. Delia joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "I've already moved the herbs inside." He glanced her way. "You think of everything?" "I have to." "No," he said. "You choose to." She rested her head against his arm. "You think that's the same thing?" "I think it tells me who you are." Autumn came slow and gold. The wheat held, the cellar stayed dry. The children slept through the nights without stirring. And one morning, Delia woke to find a note on the table. Just a short line in Zeke's hand by the cottonwoods. "Bring the rifle." She saddled her mare and rode out, the sunrise behind her. When she reached the grove, she found Zeke kneeling by the creek, a buck laid out beside him, clean shot through the heart. He stood as she approached, brushing dirt from his knees. "We'll need to dress it quick," he said. "Before the flies find it." She dismounted and tied her horse. "You could have waited." "I wanted to do something right. For you, for us." She crouched beside the buck, running her hand over its flank. "You already do." They worked in silence, hands red with blood, the smell of iron thick around them. When it was done, they loaded the meat and rode back slow, the sun warming their backs. That night, they cooked the tenderloin over the fire, and Keaton helped Zeke tan the hide in the shed. Cora began stitching a pair of gloves from the last deer they'd taken, her fingers moving with quiet confidence. Later, in the stillness of their room, Delia pressed her hand to Zeke's chest and felt the steady rhythm beneath her palm. "This is it," she said. He turned his head toward her. "What is?" "What we built. It's not just holding anymore, it's growing." He brushed her hair back, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek. "So are we." She leaned into him, letting the warmth of his body settle into hers. Outside, the air cooled. The wheat rustled in the dark. The land, at last, had given back. 2 months later, they brought a midwife out from Laramie. The woman stayed 5 days, then rode back with a full basket and a smile that lingered. By spring, a cradle sat near the hearth, carved from the same cedar Zeke had used for the coop. Delia lined it with linen, her stitches even, her hands steady. When the child came, it was morning. The snow had melted, but the earth was still cold to the touch. Cora held her brother's hand while Zeke knelt at Delia's side, his face pale but calm. The baby cried just once, loud and sure, then settled against Delia's chest. They named her Clara. Zeke built her a swing between 2 cottonwoods. Delia planted wildflowers beside the porch. Cora began sketching the house, piece by piece, in a ledger she kept beneath her mattress. Keaton took to riding the roan gelding alone, circling the pasture with a look on his face that said he belonged. And each night, when the lamps were turned low and the wind moved soft through the trees, Zeke and Delia held each other without the need for words. They had built a life from the broken things, and it held.